Jesus has his own free, independent freedom of choice. This is revealed by the words of Jesus at John chapter 10, verses 17 through 18, which reads, where Jesus is saying, this is what, sorry, this is why the Father loves me, because I surrender my life so that I may receive it again. No man takes it away from me, but I surrender it of my own initiative. So, what is the meaning of the word initiative? Initiative meaning.
Here's the definition of initiative: the ability to assess and initiate things independently.
So, Jesus points out how he has his own initiative. Now, some people may say this, for example, of why they were thinking Jesus did not have his own initiative. Because at John chapter 5, verse 30, it's where Jesus himself says, I cannot do a single thing of my own initiative. So here, Jesus clearly says, I cannot do a single thing of my own initiative. Why not? I'm gonna read further on. It said Jesus says, just as I hear, I judge, and my judgment is righteous, because I seek not my own will, but the will of him who sent me. So even right here in this point, some people may get confused, because when Jesus says, I cannot do a single thing of my initiative, they were thinking like, oh, he's just like a computer person then. He don't have his own free will. He's like an animal. He's going off of a program kind of thinking. It's not a free will kind of thinking. However, later on where Jesus says, Jesus says, just as I hear, I judge. And he says, and my judgment is righteous. And this part right here is what really stands out. He says, because I seek, right there, I seek. That's the part. So why is he not doing anything from his own initiative? It's because he says, I seek not my own will, but the will of him who sent me. So if Jesus is seeking the will of the one who sent him and not his own will, he can actually say, I cannot do a single thing of my own initiative. Because if he's making a choice to dedicate his life to the will of the Father, and he's pursuing the will of the Father in his every essence, in his every like character, in all his character and will and might, he's just continuing, made a mental choice just to be on that path, to not jump out of side of the will of the Father. And if someone is like coming up to him and they're like, well, you doing this, why you doing that? And that's wrong. And it's like, it seems like you doing this from your own independent thinking. And if he's explaining himself like, I cannot do a single thing of my own initiative, and a person may say, well, why? How does that make sense? What do you mean you can't do? The reason is explained in the same scripture, John 5:30. I seek, where he says, I seek not my own will. So if he made that choice to seek the Father's will in his every choice, and he says, I cannot do a single thing of my own initiative, then that would be correct. Because in his mind, if he cannot do it, and he's made that dedication not to do it, he can say, I cannot do it, especially if he didn't do it. And in Jesus' life, we see he didn't step outside of the will of the Father. Another point would be at John chapter 8, verses 28, where Jesus then said, where Jesus says, after you have lifted up the Son of Man, then you will know that I am he, and that I do nothing of my own initiative. So clearly, right, just right here, he's saying, I do nothing of my own initiative. And why is that? From the previous scripture, because he's seeking the will of the Father. And then he says, but just as the Father taught me, I speak these things. Now, that is a choice to speak those things. Just as when he's going to surrender his life, and we're going to go back to John chapter 10, verse 17, where it says, Jesus' word says, this is why the Father loves me, because I surrender my life, so that I may receive it again. So Jesus says the Father loves him because he surrendered his life. Now, is it his choice? Does he have a choice? Verse 18, Jesus reveals, yeah, he's been and always had a choice, where he says, no man takes it away from me, but I surrender it on my own initiative. So this is a powerful point showing that Jesus has his own initiative. Although he says at different times he cannot do a single thing of his own initiative, it's because of his choice from his own initiative to live in pursuit of the will of the Father. So yes, Jesus does have free will. He's not like a program computer puppet that, like, some people may think like, well, God had sent Jesus down in the flesh and he couldn't do nothing of his own initiative like a computer, and he was just working off of what he was programmed to do, as if he ain't have his own free will to choose not to go with the program that God wanted him to do. Jesus had free will the same as any other man. And John chapter 20 verses 17 through 18, Jesus himself specifically points it out at verse 18. So, and it makes sense too, because if you look at the pattern of choice, if someone chooses to keep going after points under someone else's will, and they already made up in their mind they're not stepping out of it, they could honestly say, I cannot do nothing of my own initiative. If I'm living under his will, pursuing his will, and I know I'm not going to jump out of it for sure 100%, and they stick to it and they die following that, then they lived under them saying, under what they said. He said he cannot, and if he did not, then that what means he stuck to what he said.